Let's jump right into it. Number 7. The curse of Tutankhamun was real. When Howard Carter's team cracked open King Tut's tomb in 1922, they didn't just unearth gold, they unearthed a legend. Within months, strange things started happening. Lights flickered, people fell ill, and then the sudden death. It was like an ancient horror movie come to life. Newspapers called it the Curse of the Pharaoh. The idea that Tutankhamun himself was reaching out from beyond the grave to punish the living spread like wildfire. It all began with Lord Carnarvon, the expedition's financier. He died suddenly just months after the tomb was opened, and the press lost its mind. Reporters claimed his dog howled and dropped dead at the exact same moment, thousands of miles away. One newspaper headline screamed, "Death comes for those who disturb the Pharaoh." And that was it. The curse went viral before the word viral even existed. Every sniffle near the excavation became proof of ancient revenge. But behind the drama, the numbers didn't add up. Most people who were involved in opening the tomb lived long, ordinary lives. Carter himself died nearly 2 decades later. No lightning bolt, no curse, just old age. Modern researchers say the so-called curse deaths were probably caused by mold, spores, or bacteria sealed in the tomb for thousands of years. Not mystical payback. Basically ancient germs, not ancient ghosts. Still, you can't blame people for believing it. After all, rumors spread that the tomb's entrance carried a dire warning. Death shall come on swift wings to him who disturbs the peace of the king. That line alone was enough to make even scientists glance over their shoulders. It didn't matter that no such inscription was actually found. It felt real. And once people believed they were cursed, coincidence became evidence. Every sneeze turned into a prophecy fulfilled. In the end, the curse wasn't carved in stone. The real curse was human fear, hype, and headlines. The magic of Tut's tomb wasn't supernatural. It was how one discovery revived the world's obsession with ancient Egypt. Number 6. Vikings wore horned helmets. You've seen the image 1,000 times. Fierce Vikings charging into battle, horns jutting from their helmets like angry bulls ready to gore anything in sight. Cartoons, football teams, and even Halloween costumes keep this image alive. It looks terrifying, theatrical, and unforgettable. Too bad it's about as real as a Marvel movie. The truth is, no Viking ever wore a horned helmet into battle. Archaeologists have uncovered weapons, armor, and even entire burial sites filled with Viking gear, but not a single horned helmet. Not one. The myth actually comes from the 1800s when an opera costume designer thought Viking characters needed a little extra wow factor. He slapped horns onto their helmets and suddenly Vikings went from real warriors to fantasy villains ready for Broadway. And once the image was planted, it spread everywhere. Artists painted Vikings with horns. Costume designers copied it. Pop culture locked it in. By the 20th century, the horned helmet was so iconic that people forgot it was just stagecraft. It's like if future historians thought Marvel movies were documentaries and decided Thor really fought aliens with a magic hammer. Now imagine charging into battle with horns on your head. One swing from an enemy blade and those horns become handles to yank you to the ground. It's the least practical battle gear imaginable. Vikings weren't stupid. They were raiders, traders, and master shipbuilders. They needed helmets that worked, not hats that doubled as coat racks. In reality, Viking helmets were plain, practical iron caps built to block swords, not star in an opera. But here's the thing. Vikings didn't need horns to be terrifying. They had sleek longships that could appear on rivers like ghosts, weapons that cut through armor, and reputations that made entire kingdoms panic. They weren't cosplay barbarians. They were efficient raiders who rewrote European history. So the next time you see a Viking mascot rocking horns, remember, that's theater, not history. The only horns Vikings cared about were the ones they filled with beer. Number 5. Roman gladiators always fought to the death. Cue the Hollywood version. The Colosseum roars, sunlight blinds the arena, and 2 men circle each other like caged animals. One slash, the other falls. The crowd erupts, the emperor giving his dramatic thumbs down, and boom, someone dies in slow motion. It's brutal, it's cinematic, and it's completely wrong. Real gladiator fights were a business, not a bloodbath. Each fighter was like a walking investment, trained, fed, and protected like a professional athlete. Losing one every show would have been like a football team killing their star player after every game. Rome wasn't stupid. They didn't want dead fighters, they wanted repeat performers. Most fights were carefully choreographed contests of skill and strategy. They were more like UFC bouts than medieval executions. The blood was real, but the death rate was much lower than people imagine. Archaeologists and historians found records showing that only a small fraction of matches ended in death. Gladiator schools were like ancient sports academies. Fighters learned techniques, trained daily, and even had personal doctors. There were referees in the arena too, making sure things didn't get out of hand. It wasn't just chaos, it was choreography, with real danger baked in. That famous thumbs down moment that Hollywood can't stop showing is a total myth. The Latin text suggests it meant put your sword down, not kill the guy. Somewhere along the way, we turned a mercy signal into a murder command. Leave it to modern cinema to mistranslate humanity into drama. And here's the twist. Some gladiators weren't slaves at all. They were volunteers chasing fame, prize money, and a shot at celebrity status. In their world, surviving the arena made you a rock star. Fans wrote graffiti of their favorite fighters. Merch existed. The Colosseum was basically the Super Bowl of blood and sweat. So no, gladiators weren't disposable action figures. They were prized athletes in a blood-soaked spectacle that Rome marketed better than any modern sports league ever could. Number 4, Napoleon was extremely short. Napoleon Bonaparte, the pocket-sized emperor with the massive ego. That's how the story goes, right? A short man who conquered half of Europe just to feel tall. It's the kind of myth that's too juicy to fact-check. The only problem? It's pure fiction, served with a side of British sarcasm. Napoleon wasn't short. He measured 5 feet 6 to 5 feet 7 in modern terms, which was perfectly average for men of his era. But when British newspapers reported his height as 5'2", they forgot to mention it was in French inches, which were longer than English ones. One translation slip, and suddenly history's greatest general was being mistaken for a garden gnome. And once the propaganda machine kicked in, there was no going back. British cartoonists turned Napoleon into a pint-sized hothead, shaking his fist at soldiers twice his height. The jokes were endless, and he became the world's first meme. They didn't just shrink his height, they shrank his dignity. It was psychological warfare through art. Imagine if today's tabloids could humiliate Elon Musk into looking 4 feet 11 inches. Same energy. But here's what's ironic. The tiny tyrant image actually worked in his favor. It made him look underestimated. Enemies mocked him right up until he bulldozed their armies off the map. Napoleon didn't have a height problem. The world had a perception problem. The myth stuck because it's perfect storytelling. A small man with big ambitions is easy to laugh at, easier to remember. But the reality? The man stood average in height and head and shoulders above almost everyone in military genius. But centuries later, we still laugh at a fiction. Psychologists even coined the Napoleon complex, a label for short guys with big egos, all based on a height he didn't actually have. So next time you hear someone drop a Napoleon complex joke, just smile. The only thing short about Napoleon was the truth, and maybe his temper. Number 3, Nero fiddled while Rome burned. The story goes that in 64 AD, while Rome was being devoured by flames, Emperor Nero stood on a balcony playing his fiddle, a cruel soundtrack to the city's destruction. It's one of history's most infamous images. The mad emperor, music in his heart, fire in his eyes. The only problem? It never happened. First off, the violin, or fiddle, didn't even exist in Nero's time. That's like saying Julius Caesar checked Twitter before crossing the Rubicon. The instrument wouldn't be invented for another 1,400 years. So right from the start, the story was out of tune. Nero did have a passion for music. He played the lyre, a string instrument closer to a harp. But when the Great Fire of Rome broke out, most accounts place him nowhere near the city. He was at his villa in Antium, over 30 miles away. When he heard the news, he didn't grab his instrument, he grabbed supplies. Ancient records, even from skeptical historians, say he rushed back to organize firefighting efforts. He opened his own palace grounds to shelter the homeless, paid for food, and even planned reconstruction projects. For a while, the guy was actually doing decent emperor things. So how did he get stuck with the world's worst soundtrack credit? Blame politics and propaganda. After Nero's death, Roman historians like Tacitus and Suetonius, who weren't exactly his fan club, turned rumor into legacy. They needed a villain, not a reformer. Nero fiddled while Rome burned became the ancient equivalent of a clickbait headline. It stuck because it's poetic, the kind of line that history teachers love and meme pages can't resist. The irony? Nero wasn't playing music over the flames, history was playing him. His reputation burned brighter than the city itself, a myth too catchy to correct. So no, Nero didn't fiddle while Rome burned. The story just hit the perfect note of drama, and the world's been replaying it ever since. Number 2, Cleopatra was Egyptian. Say Cleopatra, and you instantly picture the ultimate Egyptian queen, golden crown, black coal eyeliner, reclining in palaces along the Nile like she owned the place. Hollywood painted her as Egypt's most Egyptian ruler. The problem? Cleopatra wasn't Egyptian, not even close. She was Greek. Specifically Macedonian Greek, descended from Ptolemy, one of Alexander the Great's generals who took Egypt after his death. Cleopatra was the last ruler of the Ptolemaic dynasty, a foreign family that had been running Egypt for nearly 300 years. In other words, Egypt's most famous queen was actually part of a Greek royal line that barely spoke Egyptian. It's like finding out the all-American superhero Captain America was secretly Canadian the whole time. So why the confusion? Blame image making. Cleopatra embraced Egyptian culture like a pro. She learned the language, styled herself as the goddess Isis, and sold herself as the true daughter of the Nile. It worked. Her people saw her as Egyptian. The world remembered her that way, and centuries later, Hollywood doubled down, casting her in golden headdresses and pyramids. But dig into the DNA of her dynasty, and it's all Greek. Cleopatra's family tree was a tangled mess of intermarriages designed to keep power in the bloodline. They ruled Egypt, yes, but they weren't native Egyptians. Ironically, Cleopatra was more likely fluent in Greek philosophy than in pyramid-building traditions. Yet here's the kicker. She still went down as Egypt's ultimate icon, the queen who seduced Caesar and Antony, the woman whose death marked the fall of Egypt's pharaohs. She wasn't Egyptian by blood, but by branding, she nailed it. So next time you picture Cleopatra draped in gold as Egypt's last pharaoh, remember, she was a Greek running Egypt. The greatest queen of the Nile was, in truth, a foreigner. Number 1. Pyramids were built by slaves. If you picture the pyramids being built, chances are you see a scene straight out of an old Hollywood epic. Endless lines of slaves, whipped under the blazing desert sun, dragging giant blocks like ants in chains. It's an image so dramatic that it's stuck for centuries, but the truth is actually stranger and way more impressive. When modern archaeologists started digging near the pyramids, they didn't find whips and chains. They found bakeries, breweries, even evidence of cattle being butchered by the thousands. These weren't prison camps, they were full-blown worker villages, ancient Egypt's version of a construction site mixed with a food court. Imagine a place where bread, beer, and meat fueled an army of masons and haulers, not shackles and misery. And here's the kicker. When these workers died, many were buried near the pyramids themselves. That's a royal honor. You don't bury slaves beside pharaohs, you bury valued citizens who helped build something eternal. The myth of slaves came much later, popularized by Greek historians and reinforced by Hollywood epics that needed a good villain, because the image of slaves dragging blocks under the whip is simple, brutal, and easy to sell. The truth that Egypt organized a massive state-run workforce, where ordinary citizens proudly labored for their pharaoh, doesn't sound as dramatic, but it's real. Think of it like this. Building the pyramids wasn't punishment. It was the ancient world's moon landing, a national achievement carved out of limestone that still towers over us 4,500 years later. So no, the pyramids weren't born from chains and suffering. They were built by some of history's first professional construction crews, fueled by bread and beer, driven by pride, and leaving behind monuments that make skyscrapers look like toys. That's all for now. Subscribe to see what's coming next, hit like, or start a comment debate. It all helps.